So, of course, the running joke is that Twitter and Facebook are all people posting self-absorbed accounts of what they had for lunch. I know I put my chicken salad sandwich up. I tweeted that earlier. But, of course, everyone who uses social media knows better, although I did tweet my sandwich today. Seriously, we have all seen how social media can help family, friends, helps you keep in touch. You've probably had to advocate to your family how they can be the catalyst for new friendships, the force behind popular movements. And my next guests are going to talk about another positive aspect of social media, its ability to provide life-saving information during disasters and other crises. So please welcome Professor Leisha Palin, the University of Colorado, and Andres Monroy Hernandez of Microsoft Research. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
This is cool stuff. In fact, I have a personal story related to what you're going to talk about, which we'll get to, but I want to start right in the beginning. Leisha, you've been studying crisis in informatics.
Yes, that's right.
A very interesting sounding term. Crisis informatics. Explain what that is.
Crisis informatics is the study of the use and the potential future uses of social media and social computing in emergency management, both the warning, response, recovery, and mitigation of emergencies.
Okay, so your research deals with online responses to natural disasters like floods, earthquakes, tornadoes, and especially online groups that have formed around the mission of providing humanitarian aid. Can you talk about these groups?
Right. So what we find is that in reaction to disaster, people go online and they're searching for information, those who are victims of the event, but then those who are interested in learning more about the event also go online to find out what's going on. And while those remote interested parties are interested in what's going on, they're seeing that there are a number of other tweets coming by that say, hey, I've got a need for antibiotics. They see somebody else say, I have an offer of antibiotics. Then they begin as acting as brokers for these needs and offers. And then you start seeing groups of these dyads of people create bigger groups, and they develop these self-organizing social networks to be able to help others online.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Are these permanent organizations or sort of, the ad hoc groups that pop up after a crisis hits?
Yeah, there's a mix. So you have spontaneous volunteers, spontaneous convergers who appear after every response. Then you have those who started out that way, but then have formalized themselves into groups that persist across events. Some of these groups are called, one group is called Humanity Road. The Humanitarian OpenStreetMap group is another one of those. And then what Humanity Road does, for example, as well as some other groups do, they respond to events and then teach locals how to crisis tweet and how to find and search for good information.
So yeah, let's talk specifically about that. You mentioned those two, Humanity Road, OpenStreetMaps. What do they do during natural disasters? Like, let's just put it in context of like the Haiti earthquake. What happened?
Right, so Humanity Road sprang up out of the Haiti response, where people were doing that kind of ad hoc assistance of helping each other. And they got very, very good at filtering information about tweeting good information back out, doing the detective work of finding little bits of information that people needed. And they then developed a practice of good crisis tweeting. And they incorporated later that year, in April of 2010, the earthquake hit in January, and they incorporated it as a nonprofit organization called Humanity Road. And then OpenStreetMap, that community has been around for some years, but the humanitarian arm of the OpenStreetMap team, HOT, Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, incorporated also later that year to help localize mapping efforts in regions of the world that needed that are underdeveloped and needed good maps and to be able to support their own resources and understand what kind of resources that they had.
Now, I understand you've got some photos and examples here with you. That's why I've given you the clicker. You've got control of the clicker.
Right. So the first photo I want to show you is just to, let's see, did that?
They'll bring it up here on the screen for you. They'll do the heavy lifting.
All right, so this first photo is of, this is taken by a FEMA photographer in the wake, excuse me, of the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And what I think is impressive about this photo is it's one tiny piece of a photo of a much larger photo of a large bulletin board in the Astrodome of all missing person flyers.
Wow.
There were about 115 shelters in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and then Rita. And this is the very analog way in which people were trying to find each other. So we can think about ways in which social media can improve this kind of information task. And we are seeing examples of that. So,
wow. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yep.
Obviously, it seems like at face value, this would be effective because of the immediacy. Like you said, it's an emergency. You can get information out there right away. I was on vacation not too long ago in Mexico, and me and my father were the only two people awake. And I said, did the room just shake? Did we just feel an earthquake? And I wasn't seeing anything, and I was kind of panicked about it. Is something happening? We are on the water. Do I need to be worried? So my first reaction, I'm going to go to Twitter, and I'm going to type in. Sure enough, stuff was popping up immediately. So it seems like the immediacy is obviously one big part of it, but how does it compare to physical organizations like the Red Cross?
Okay, so a couple of things there. So when disaster strikes, or where we think maybe it has, people have always turned to any kind of source they can to get information. So social media is new in that way. It's a new channel, but the behaviors of intensified information search are not new. So you'll go to any kind of piece of information to be able to assemble your sense of what's going on. The American Red Cross, in relationship to, say, something like Humanity Road, I think Humanity Road is modeled in some ways after the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross breathes in volunteers with every single event. It's a relatively small organization in terms of its permanent employees, and they expand to respond to every event with certified volunteers. The idea behind Humanity Road is very much the same, but they have a core set of people who respond from event to event, and then they help spontaneous convergers, those who are suddenly looking to get information or provide information, as you were for the earthquake, to teach them how to do that well in the moment.
So a lot of folks want to know what's sort of the bottom line. How effective are organizations like Humanity Road, OpenStreetMaps?
Well, we're still learning exactly how effective they are in terms of how it matters to things on the ground. We have a lot of good examples where they seem to have impact. We know in the case of the OpenStreetMap initiative, for example, 600 volunteers mapped Haiti. It was a virtually unmapped country the day before the event, and within 21 days they fully mapped the country based on using donated aerial and satellite photography imagery. So that was a pretty remarkable accomplishment. What Humanity Road is doing, I think, is demonstrating for us over and over again through a development of very good practice what kinds of future work we will see in digital information processing that happens remotely, either by volunteers or by professionals who might assume that role and complement that role as we think about changing emergency management in the future.
So obviously something like Humanity Road is, called upon when disaster hits. What do they do in between?
Well, there are events happening around the world daily. We don't hear about all of them, but there are floods that devastate a region. They might not make national news or global news, but they're happening. So Humanity Road has plenty of events to respond to, and there's actually very little in between.
Well, and given that they are global and these people are dispersed across the globe, how do you keep that core group together?
Well, what these groups are doing, these two groups as well as other groups, including the Standby Task Force and some others, what they do is they rely on the kind of tools we've become accustomed to, Skype chats. They document the work that they do, they catalog their conversations, and they work as a largely virtual organization, maintaining, and they organize around the products of their work as well. So they're all invested in the products of their work. It's another way in which they organize.
What for you has been the biggest surprise in studying groups like Humanity Road and OpenStreetMaps?
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of people, what is surprising is that people are so innovative and that crisis is a place of innovation. For me, that doesn't surprise me as much because I think people are very interesting and that we do innovate all the time. What does surprise me is that from event to event, where we, the people who are responding in this fashion, learn how to do it better and better and better. So we're seeing real progress on this new front of innovation. So we're seeing real rapid innovation that's kind of sticking. And that's the surprise for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Andres, you're in the hot seat. Laisha gets to catch her breath. You've been studying the use of social media during a different kind of crisis, violence, warring drug cartels in Mexico, for example. Before we get how people are using social media in this context, give us a feel for the scope of the problem.
Right. So in the case of Mexico, as you mentioned, we've been looking at how citizens are using social media as an alternative mechanism to get information about what's happening on the streets, primarily because as opposed to like natural disasters in the US or any developed country, in Mexico, both the government and the media are being threatened by criminal organizations. So the information flow is not working the same way you would expect in any other place. So citizens are using social media as a way to connect with each other and create these alert networks that basically help them know what's going on in the streets, regardless of whether the media is reporting on it or not.
And you chose 4 cities to study. How did you choose those 4 cities?
Primarily because of the high amount, like the number of violent events occurring in those cities, and also because I'm really familiar with the area as a person who lived there in the northern part of Mexico for many years. I really, know what's happening, at least from conversations with friends and family, and I wanted to see, from big data on social media, what we could learn that we couldn't know before.
And what were the 4 cities?
The cities were Reynosa, it's a city in the northern part of Tamaulipas, in the border with Texas.
Okay.
Monterrey, which is one of the largest cities in Mexico. Saltillo, which is a city close to Monterrey, but far enough that it's a different metropolitan area. And Veracruz, which is in the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay, so these are clearly, the residents there are clearly facing the threat of drug-related violence on a semi-regular basis. Yes. How are they using Twitter, as you mentioned, to sort of help combat this?
Right, so one of the interesting things is that if you turn on the TV or open the newspaper in the cities, you don't see the sort of events that people are seeing on the streets. So, lots of friends and family who live there know that things are happening, but they don't find the information on social media. On traditional media. So they use social media as a mechanism to know what's going on right now in the streets. So it's not only more truthful to what's going on, but also faster. So oftentimes traditional media does report what happens, but many hours or days afterwards, once they clean up their story and they try to make sure that the journalists are not threatened, because oftentimes journalists are being killed in Mexico because of the kind of things that they report. So social media is really one of the few sources of information that is actually useful.
And a lot of folks would be saying, well, why would an average citizen turn to Twitter? Why wouldn't they just call the police?
Right, so the police and many other kind of traditional institutions are also afraid of, talking about these issues because they are also being threatened by criminal organizations. And in some cases, unfortunately, they are even part of these criminal organizations.
Yeah, obviously, the other difference, like you said, is that police are traditionally marked, whereas average, person on the street maybe could send out something seeing what they have happening down the road. But then, of course, as you mentioned, comes the threat of what could happen to them. What about people on the receiving end of the violence alert tweets? Would they turn to Twitter for this information instead of turning on the radio or the TV?
Right, so that's one of the main challenges with this kind of work, where a lot of the people who are reporting things on social media, they report things that are publicly available already, information that if you were there in the streets, you will see or hear. There is a subset of people who are actually using social media also to report private information. And that's actually a lot more challenging because it does come with a lot of risk. And in fact, there's been a number of people who have been killed for reporting things like this on social media. So in the work that I do, I try to focus on the public information. First, because it's safer, not safe, but safer. And also I don't want to put the subjects that I'm studying at risk. But there is a number of people who are actually using social media to report private information that may affect directly to them. And in fact, there's the case of this famous blogger who ran this popular blog called Blog del Narco in Mexico, who for many years had been reporting things of what happens on the streets, and she had to escape the country recently. She moved to Spain, and she has been narrating this, live on Twitter, and she even wrote a book and so on. So there's big challenges with these kinds of reports in social media.
And obviously, the view of not necessarily trusting the media, not necessarily trusting the police, isn't just a Mexico problem. It's a global thing. Sometimes people aren't quite sure. But why would you say that people would be more likely to trust anonymous tweets? Because sometimes we don't know who this is. Maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe they're not.
Right. And in some cases, people have accused other Twitter users that they are kind of perhaps working with some of the criminal organizations and spreading misinformation to create panic. It's unclear whether that has happened or not, but definitely there is this risk there. One of the nice things about social media, especially systems like Twitter, is that all the information is public, and you can also go back in history and see, if you tweeted something, I can correlate that to perhaps other people who might have reported the same thing, and in aggregate, we can kind of get a sense of the degree to which your reputation it holds, over the course of several months. So some of the people who are really engaged in social media become curators, and they aggregate information that they see there, and they gain a lot of reputation as a result of their curation process. So they kind of, if they see that one particular event is reported by multiple different people, that kind of event, this person might decide to tweet it, and kind of, if people feel that that's actually accurate, they might gain more reputation. Some of these curators have lost their reputation after, several instances of circumstances where they report things that many many people disagree that are true, and then over the course of several days, then they lose all their followers. So it's a very fluid and dynamic set of circumstances.
Right, and it's certainly an interesting time in the shift of information and who's the authority. Some of these tweeters and bloggers, as you said, have sort of displaced some traditional journalists, people that used to be seen as the go-to. Do those people that are tweeting and all that, do they see themselves that way as now authority?
Yeah, in fact, one of the fascinating things that we found is we actually did an analysis of the data and trying to identify those curators, those people who are highly visible via the number of retweets that they receive from other people and the number of the amount of content that they produce. And we actually interview some of them and we talk to them and see, how they see their role in this ecosystem. And many of them say that they do feel like they're as if they were journalists and as if they were like war correspondents in this kind of war that is going on. So a lot of them do see their role as altruistic and very similar to the work that journalists do.
Obviously, not a lot of folks do things these days if there's not some sort of a financial gain. So I'm sure a lot of people are saying, so these people are, for the most part, even though they have followers and all that, they're anonymous. They got to be unpaid. What's in it for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did ask them, what are your motivations for this kind of work? And many of them say, I just want to help my community. There is a need there. There's information that needs to be spread, and I'm doing this for altruistic reasons. But one of the fascinating things is that once, I talked to them for a longer period of time, I did get to see and understand that they're also interested in gaining certain kind of reputation in the community. Mm-hmm. So they do it for altruistic reasons, yes, but they also feel sometimes threatened by other curators who are doing the same kind of job. So that was one of the interesting things that I was expecting to see this cohesive group of people working together for the greater good. And for the most part, that's true. But when it comes to like how fast can you report something, they do try to do the same thing that traditional journalists do, which is like who has the first to report kind of event. So who can claim to be the first one to report a certain thing? So when I asked them, what are the challenges that you see with Twitter, for example, one of the things they mentioned, all of them mentioned, the stealing of tweets was one of the main problems. So they really are concerned about like who retweeted me and whether they gave me credit or not. So it's really interesting to see these kind of two levels of motivation, the altruistic side of things as well as the reputation-driven need for getting recognition.
Right. So it seems like these folks it's evolving into what traditional media really is founded upon, in that competitive nature. Who's got it first? Right. But this adds a very sensitive layer of danger. Aren't these folks worried about the fact that they're essentially putting a big target on their back with, for example, the drug cartels to say, find out who this is?
Right. Yeah, and I think this is where I do distinguish between the people who publish information that is already public, like information about shootings or grenade attacks or car bombs that are happening out in the streets, which everybody will know about it. So on that side, I think the danger is less. It's not null, but it's less because the cartels don't really care that much about whether that information is spread. And sometimes they actually like it because they give them publicity for their acts. And there is another group of people which is a lot smaller, the ones that I was saying that report kind of private information. And those have been threatened and in some cases killed by the drug cartels. So I think the percentage of people who are reporting public information is probably the majority of them. And the ones who are reporting private information are very small. And those are the ones who run the highest risk.
Obviously, this is very compelling stuff. And a lot of folks watching us online from around the globe, around the country right now, want to weigh in. We've got questions. They can pose them right there on the screen. And one just came in for Laisha. It says, when a disaster hits, the communication infrastructure is down or becomes highly congested as well, which I'm sure you're very aware of. What are the progresses in addressing that catch-22 scenario? Of course, yeah, people want to turn to it, but that's one of those things that tends to get bogged down.
Right. So what we see is that we see the social sphere making up for the problems with it in the technical world. So, for example, while systems are down, there'll be a band of people almost outside the event tweeting and searching for information on behalf of them and kind of staging the information until that part of the world is back up online again. So you see a lot of proxy, people acting on behalf of others as proxies of those who are in the space. So they might be communicating by phone, they might be hearing radio, they'll tweet things out, they'll, again, stage information for when people are back online and able to retrieve it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so any thoughts from, doing your research and what you're seeing and how this is evolving? Andres, any thoughts on how these social media reporters could maybe be more effective?
Yeah, in fact, this summer I have a student working with me on looking beyond just like this feed of small messages. So most of the reports on kind of emergencies are often these like little blurbs of 140 characters or an image, but they don't go as far as like writing an article in the New York Times, for example. But what we're trying to do is create a tool that will allow people to collaboratively write articles about what's going on in a very kind of template-driven way. So we're trying to do this both by kind of reaching out to bloggers who are doing this day to day, and not necessarily in Mexico, but actually we are doing some of these experiments here in Seattle. But also trying to create a system that will elicit responses very easily, and where you can contribute by simply submitting a photo, but also all the way to editing the article that gives context of who, what, where is happening. So we're trying to kind of fill in the space in between, a New York Times article and social media feed. Somewhere in between, I think there's a nice spot that we can, help people.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, and thanks for sharing some of your research. This is great stuff. We appreciate it. Thaisha, Andres, thanks for coming by. We appreciate it. Helping us understand that vital role social media can play during crises. So when your mom tells you to get off Twitter, you can say, Mom, it's valuable. This could be my job one day.
Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.